This isn't your usual location.
No, this is the pad with the son's PC in the background, which makes my Surface Pro look like a bit of a poor imitation of a computer.
Electronic paperweight compared to that.
Oh, what? Sorry, mate. A paperweight.
It's an electronic paperweight compared to what he's got.
Yeah, he's got the beast. So, thanks, Matt. And yeah, I've got still got my. I woke up on the dark side. There you go. That's my pajama wear for you. So apologies for that as well, everyone viewing. So how are things? You're looking really well.
Hey, we're good. We've just had a chat on. Life's good. It's simple. It's basic. It's straightforward. No, we're pretty good at this end.
Good. And where are you, Matt?
Melbourne.
In Melbourne. Okay. And
So,
you're okay? No COVID bananas or anything like that.
2 weeks. Melbourne now has 2 weeks. No community transition. So we're rolling donuts for 2 weeks straight, which is good.
Yeah.
We're not very good with our vaccine rollout. There's a lot of, but I don't know whether that's poor execution or political.
Is that the anti-vaxxer movement at work, do you think, in Melbourne?
Look, the rollout is slow, but I think we're down on the priority list because, we're an island and we've been able to, put up borders and we've been able to stop. And, there's a range of factors why we've been able to do it. The rollout's slow, but, the fact that the community has managed to get 2 weeks without a community transmission, we're doing something all right. So,
yeah.
I don't know whether the management of it, a lot of my family, as I've mentioned before, my family and my wife's family is in the UK. We'd love to get back. So hopefully we get vaccinated, UK gets vaccinated, we can start to travel before the year's out.
Yeah. Well, that's the hope, isn't it? There's a lot of chatter on the local Southwest London Mumsnet about, oh, where are you going to go away in Europe this year? And I'm like, what? Like 2 weeks ago, it's like the Grim Reaper was knocking at everyone's door, and now it's like, the chat at the school gate is, oh, I hear Barbados is open again. It's kind of.
Tell them they're going to Brighton. That's it. They're going to Brighton and they're going to the Cotswolds.
Cornwall, I think, is the most. It's been a surfy type. I'm sure you probably remember those. Did you go to Cornwall when you lived over there?
Yeah, I've got some mates that still live down there, and they run a surf camp and yoga retreat down there. Yeah.
Whoa. Great. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, checked out, having the time of their lives, I imagine. So, Matt, in view of time, because obviously we've kept you a bit with Bill Gates' lovely little interruption. I was trying to rack my brains on was it 2014 or 15 or maybe even earlier that you first.
Yeah, I reckon you're about right. I saw your email. I was thinking it's probably 13, 14. You're probably right.
I think that's quite a nice introduction in a way, because when we first met, you came and pitched it. It must have been Notwicks 12, 13 or 14 when we were hosting. They were all hosted in the esteemed offices of Bloomberg, and I was trying to rack my brain for the name of your the startup you had, because it was a really interesting one that was disrupting the world of. Oh, there's a small creature.
You've got a lurker in the background.
Could you lurk off, please? Thank you. Sorry about that. Oh, that warning didn't work. So it was great because it was disrupting. It was kind of disrupting sports and sports agents from memory. Is that? Yeah.
We were a three-sided marketplace, and that completely blind ignorance around how hard it is to create marketplace businesses and how hard two-sided are. And we just ran in with total hubris that we could do a three-sided one. But it was interrupting and trying to create this. The premise was that talent was everywhere, and coming from being a sports agent, 80% of my clients didn't need me. They just needed the connections that I had via email or in my phone. And that was the premise. And the fact that, technology now enabled you to upload your video footage, your highlights, all those sorts of things. And then we could create basically a database that was allowed to be, a range of search functionality. But no matter where the clubs were, they could create search filters that search for players by, age, weight, date of birth, position, and then things like footage and passports and visas and all these sorts of things, and connect them. And it worked. We did, thousands of connections and thousands of placements. The problem was the audience for it didn't have a huge capacity to pay. So tier 1 clubs had certain amount, and we were solving a problem for the long tail, but the long tail didn't pay enough money to create enough enterprise value. So then we had to look at ways where we were trying to monetize from the agents. But the agents, and partly because I was a former agent, there was this bias that said, well, he's clearly doing it to get his own book up. And that was, not where. So there was a whole range of problems that, I got wrong, and we do different.
Well, it's all a learning curve, isn't it? And for the audience, it was focused on rugby, wasn't it? And then did you move to the States and focus it on American football? Is that the right sort of?
We did a little bit, yeah. We started with rugby, 100% correct. And then when we moved to the Valley and I raised sort of money in London from a US VC, and then took the business and we flipped it to a US company, a Delaware Corp. And then we got connected with a lot of the professional sides and sort of that angel network and that VC network in the US. And one of the professional sides, the 49ers at that time, had just signed Jared Hayne. So they'd seen this player who was an NRL player, Fijian origins, and they'd signed him to play in the NFL. So there was this whole sort of movement around, okay, maybe if we can profile the athlete. And I went in there and did this product demo, and I was like, you think Jared Hayne's good? He's actually pretty average compared to the sort of profile of Fijian athletes that are around. And we'd had these guys on the platform that were, 6'4", they run sub 5 40 meters, out the wind, beautiful ball hand, all of these sorts of things. And they were just sitting on the islands of Fiji. So we were able to start to profile athletes, and that was a real attraction. So the 49ers and their president got involved in the business, and he was a fantastic mentor and advisor. But we'd started off too niche, and then there were some other companies within that market, Captain U, Be Recruited, that had this really entrenched model around the US collegiate system when we're taking athletes through from college to professional. And one of our biggest competitors at the time raised, a couple of $100 million. So we kind of got boxed in as this Commonwealth sports, cricket, rugby, those sorts of sports. And then trying to scale that in the US became problematic. And again, that was one of the problems. My accent and being Australian and trying to do a sports team in US colleges probably wasn't ideal.
But all a learning curve.
Yeah, and so many great friends now. I still now my investors now I still share deal flow with, and the gentleman who from the 49ers who was really helpful and just so much value. He and I now still exchange contacts, share deal flow, share contact. It's just been phenomenal.
So I suppose we're looking at how you perhaps evolved into the VC type environment, because was it there in what was the name of the business, because it's been really bugging me, the startup.
Sporple.
That's it, Sporple. Yes, I remember, because you had a lot of interest. I remember when you pitched, there was you kind of like people were throwing business cards at you like that, which was great. But yeah, so then was it kind of the natural evolution towards? Did you work as a VC over in the States as well? I was trying to piece together that bit, or was it kind of moved home and then set up ACT?
You're right again. So the company, the VC office that funded the company was a fund that was set up specifically to fund immigrant entrepreneurs. So what the program was, you actually worked for the VC fund in a range of different roles and worked on your startup. So there was a hybrid model, but they sponsored my visa to work for the VC fund. So I worked with them for just under 2 years. And the model was therefore you would do some work with them, and you would also do some work with, building your company, and they would help facilitate introductions to talent, to other VCs. So the whole point is once that company, your company hit a level of maturity, you could sponsor your own visa or take care of your own visa, and therefore roll out and build your own company. So it was the model was for immigrant entrepreneurs, but also entrepreneurs who are on student visas that have ideas and want to build companies, and they will fund those student entrepreneurs to go out and build their company.
Yeah, okay. Is that still happening? Still going on?
Yeah. It's called Unshackled Ventures. They're a really sort of, I would say, they're a small fund in terms of total funds under management, but they're a pretty influential fund in terms of their LPs and the companies that they're funding. They're really interesting.
That's interesting. And then from there, the move home, and I believe that was straight.
Not even close. From there, I went. Well, I went home for 6 weeks, and I got recruited by a really highly funded Australian startup that said to me, "We've raised this amount of money. We need to raise a lot more money. And we need someone to run our sales function and our global expansion. Are you interested?" And I said, yes. And they said, right, you're going to be based in India, Singapore, and New York. And I said, India and Singapore are probably least priorities at this particular point in my life. Straight back to New York. And then I was there for about 7 months and realized that the entire company was built on a model that was outside Google's ad policy. And Google flipped the switch one day and we saw our revenues drop 87% in a day. So I went,
this
is problematic. And stayed down, I imagine.
Yeah. When they went off, they were off. And then we basically had to shift from monetization strategies to legal strategies. Google are obviously one of those companies that are easy to negotiate with because they're a small company and you can pick up the phone and call customer
I think service. They're known for that, actually. I'm pretty sure it's their tagline.
Yeah, so we did that. So it was good fun. Oh, do you know what? I liked the fight. I enjoyed the fight.
Sounds like you picked one, definitely.
I was flying.
I'm not sure I was kind of on. If I was looking at maybe putting a bet on that boxing match.
It didn't get past the first round.
Heavyweight versus featherweight, round 1. Ding ding.
Featherweight
KO.
Featherweight is an oversized compliment. Like it's just, I'm still getting. The company is in sort of this arbitration and liquidation process, fighting Google. I don't know whether I still get a wad of papers from the courts of New York every 6 weeks saying latest update from your battle. I'm like, oh my god. Whoever's paying for this,
we might need to change the subject because obviously we do use our good friends at Google with our vodcast. So, but yeah, well, that's so that was a bit of a shock, wasn't it?
It was great fun, great team, big fight. It was a lot of fun, and then I ended up going down to Austin, Texas, for 12 months, where my son was born. My son was born in Austin, and then I ran a social ads business there, wholly predicated on getting the business acquired by a private equity firm. So I did that, and they were an agency in Australia that spun off this tech business that was based in the US, social ads business, basically trying to build on top of the Facebook ecosystem for multi-location businesses, Dairy Queen, Burger King, all this, and selling social ads that could be, distributed down to very, very localized options. Did that. They got acquired by the private equity firm, and the visa I was on had a 7-day termination. So I had 7 days to leave the country, and we packed our bags and spent 6 weeks traveling around the UK, catching up with family, friends, and all that sort of stuff.
So my question then is, living in Texas, leaving Texas, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you miss Whataburger?
Mate, do you know what I miss? Tacos.
Oh yeah, exactly. Tex-Mex tacos. Yeah.
I could have breakfast, lunch, and dinner tacos. They were so good.
3 different kinds as well.
I have a different preference in brand for breakfast tacos to lunch tacos to dinner tacos. Yeah.
So it's quite interesting, Matt, because I suppose when you're being, you're talking to different founders, maybe for obviously we'll talk about ACT in a sec, but you have all these you have a number of VCs in the UK especially who pride themselves on oh yes, I founded Skype and I sold it to Microsoft, and we're a founder-led VC. Yeah. You certainly have the badges of war from your experiences, don't you, by the sound of things? I mean, you can certainly say, yeah, I know what being a founder is really like.
What's really funny, like you look at a company like Hopin in the UK right now.
Yeah.
So the founding of Hopin, you would never, ever imagine how good that timing was. So it was founded 2 years ago, and it's a $6.5 billion valuation.
Yeah.
Whoever founded that and however they founded the timing of it, and there's another conversation about who, why, but that timing is just blessed.
Yeah.
Like there are so many things that go into that timing around when you approach your first investor, when you get your first product into market, all of those things that happen that are just luck. And if you think you're a genius, you're kidding yourself. Yes, you're an incredibly smart person, but you can't control the timing. Like you didn't predict in 2018 we'd have a global pandemic. You just didn't. So I think those sorts of things, you just, good luck to them. And I think that's all part of the process. But I just think that if you think you're the genius that saw all this happening, like.
So I saw a really interesting article from Idea Lab, and I've just looked it up to reference it. They said the top 5 factors for success in 200 VC-backed companies. Timing, to your point, was number 1 at 42%. And after that, it was the team and then the idea. But timing, over 42% for, entrepreneur returns. It's crazy, right?
However, I'm doing a bit of work at the moment on a report that I'm going to publish on different verticals and how things are trending this year and how people are looking out, and sentiment based, talking to lots of different VCs and angels. And there is a kind of interesting point being made by not a majority but a number of the really astute VCs that, again, going back to timing, that it's really interesting how they're really pushing Hopin really, really aggressively, and the valuations at an all-time high. Are we really going to learn from this pandemic? And when in 6 months' time, when we could all go back to our offices and we all have the face-to-faces, is that when we suddenly realize that fool's gold has been poured into Hopin, and that basically it isn't the future, which, I suppose is a more wider point about the pandemic and not just Hopin, but, I really do hope we do learn from the way to work, the future of work from the pandemic, what we're doing now. I would have never imagined doing this like 18 months ago. But I mean, I don't know if you have any views on that, whether there are certain businesses, they call them the COVID accelerated businesses. You've avoided them when you've been at ACT, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the whole learnings from the pandemic.
I've got probably 2 schools of thought. Like if we look at a business like Hopin, and I'm sort of hesitant to dwell on it, but if we look at it for what it is, they've been exceptionally fortunate around timing. They couldn't have picked the pandemic. It's happened. They've capitalized on it. And good luck to them. I think the challenge then is they've got to live up to and grow into a $6.5 billion valuation. The test will come if the executive team there is able to recruit elite talent, which will build out that business, and they'll need to sort of build out the breadth of the product to actually sort of diversify into, collaborations and all the other bits that will justify that sort of valuation and that sort of enterprise value. So they may do that. That will probably change my opinion from, great lucky founders to great founders. I think that'll be that evolution. Yeah. I think to the second part of your sort of comment or your question around COVID as an accelerant. My view is there were probably a huge amount of tailwinds that were coming into this industry where some average businesses were getting funded because we thought they probably had a sort of a window to an M&A event in the next 3 to 5 years. And COVID's done away with them. And I think that's a really good thing. Yeah. And I think we've been exceptionally fortunate as a media fund to ACT invests in media, and that's all we do. And I think now a lot of companies are realizing that every company or a much bigger suite of companies are media companies. They have to produce content to be relevant. They have to understand their audience. So I think on the whole, COVID has been a really good accelerant for a lot of businesses because the conversations they were trying to have with customers or VCs or potential partners was a really difficult conversation. And COVID has sort of, created this opportunity to accelerate those conversations, accelerate that education. So I think there's an opportunity there, and I don't necessarily think COVID's been the worst thing for a lot of businesses.
I think it's going to really depend on where that balance is struck for a lot of those businesses. Let's stay with the Hopin example. Personally, I'm definitely going to be more selective about which events I attend physically. I will attend more events digitally than I probably did in the past. And is that balance, that kind of other half, is that enough on scale for Hopin to be valued at 6 billion? Right? That's that interesting question.
Can I give you a tip? We're looking, there's a company called Pixel Max, UK company based up north, bizarrely not headquartered far from Hopin. Bizarre. What they're doing, I think what they're doing is really interesting because they're taking a much broader approach to remote. So remote is not just work from home, because work from home or work in person, just because you're giving people the flexibility to say, oh, we're a really innovative company, you can work in the office, you can work from home, we're all flexible. That doesn't solve for loneliness, and it doesn't solve for connection. And just a Zoom call like we're doing now, it's two-dimensional. We're not actually going to getting this other parts of what makes the human interaction so rich and so valuable. And what Pixel Max are doing is they're creating these spaces. So within a virtual world or within a virtual conference, they're creating the ability to create moments. And it's moments where I can come up to you, Chris, and have a one-on-one conversation. Or it might be a moment where Anthony, you and I will go over and we'll watch a guest speaker together and we'll be able to have a conversation. That's the part that I think is really interesting, because virtual worlds are very different to video calls. And video calls are still two-dimensional. There's a whole range of information now on Zoom fatigue and video call. It's, for us selfishly, it's been great because companies, instead of pitching investors in San Francisco, are now pitching us because it's the same process. Yeah. But I think there's a bigger dimension here, and that's around how we engage with humans and
so is that the the sort of Anthony and I and Paolo, one of our other colleagues, we had a really interesting chat this week with one of they're kind of like one of the aspiring VR businesses in the UK, or they're preaching themselves to be. Is it the VR AR piece that comes in to help that Hopin second generation type experience?
It may be, but I think you have to build for both, because to create a big business, VR or AR is a part of that, and it's a really immersive experience, but that's only one part of it. If you want to be a truly global business or truly have this width of exposure, you have to be able to create an experience so that, the old 65-year-old bloke who's used to going to trade events, he's never going to put on, VR goggles. The lady who's been doing, trade shows and very successful trade shows in Midwest US, she's not putting on VR goggles. So if you want to appeal to that market, you need to come up with a product that has a very sort of low education curve technically. And if you can do that and still provide value, then you've got something really interesting.
Yeah. Okay. And then you sort of touched on a bit on ACT there and the media focus. Digging a bit more into that as well. We've talked about Hopin as well. I'm just curious. I sent you a report this morning that came out in Sifted, which ironically was looking at the top European media startups, and wondered, you mentioned the business in the north of England, but is Europe alive? Because I was looking at this report and it seemed like I thought it was just on Europe, and then at the bottom they had one company based in London, and so they still classify us as European. Yeah, I'm just kind of, what's the landscape looking like?
Look, there's a lot of doomsay. I don't believe it. Like, for us, we are an Australian VC focused on media, but we have great partners in a fund called Procura Ventures up in the north of England that we work really closely with. They're fantastic. If we see a deal that's not suitable for us, we will share it with them. if they're doing a deal and they want expertise around media, they share it with us, and they invite us to co-invest. Now, you asked me also the question around, like, a lot of people are seeing it as real sharp elbowed and it's really competitive for deals. We don't see that. And we don't see that because for ACT, we're a very deliberate thematic fund. So if they want what we hope to be the best investors in media globally, that's our ambition. If you want people that can add that strategic value and accelerant beyond capital, that's when we get involved in the deal. There are so many, vertical agnostic funds that are bigger than us, that have more global offices than us. Go with them. If you're just after the money, great, go for it. That's not where we're going to play. If you want investors that really lean into it and add, operational, you talk about the scars that I've got. Our executive chairman is a guy called Pete Tonner, CEO of News Limited, CEO of Foxtel, CEO of REA. Pete has a global network. If you want someone who can add value in that capacity, that's when you'll take money from ACT. My business partner, Adam Shaw, he ran the global media for the Irwin family. So from Australia Zoo, all of the stuff that you saw there, people that understand that market, you'll come to us. Our advisors, there's a lady by the name of Olivia Humphreys. She founded Canopy. So it's an OTT streaming service, deliberately, targeting universities and libraries. If you want to understand the streaming space for niche video and how to build a globally, valuable business, that's when you come to ACT. One of our other advisors, John Penn, CEO for the BBC for APAC. Sandra Schwartz, former managing director and president of Sony and Warner Brothers Animation. That's where we add value. Okay. There's a lot of people out there to write your check. There's probably less people who can add a value like we can in the media space.
That's an impressive array of talent you've got there, Matt. Then I suppose just going back to the point about Europe, you have the contact in the north of England with Pretoria, great fun. We do stuff with them. Just are there local heroes or local funds dotted around Europe and the US, or is it kind of forming, or because how does that work?
All of the above. And because some of the founders, we've got an investment in a company called XR Games, which is a VR and XR gaming company that just about released the new Zombieland game. One of their founders, Bobby, is a great guy and he's super connected. So we work really closely with Bobby. He has a network. You start to build this sort of, reputational virality, saying, oh, Adam and Matt really helped me with this and work with us to get here and A, B, and C. And that's the way we build our reputation. We're not, out there sort of flag waving and, taking out ads in the paper. That's just not our style.
Opening a global office in Berlin or anything like that. Yeah.
That's not us.
Hilarious movie. Have you seen it, Chris?
No, I haven't.
Zombieland.
It's one of those that my wife will she'll just think it's death, gore, and what the kids are playing on their PC, so she won't want them watching it, even though they're playing it on their PC.
Yeah.
Very funny, worth a watch.
It's a bit like Shaun of the Dead, but the American version.
Okay. So Zombieland was the last point. No link here, but I was going to ask about Australia, and you talked clearly, the global focus of the fund. What's the latest on Australia? We had Christian Fays on a week or so ago, and he's based out in Queensland. He's sort of trying to head back to London to run Lend Invest eventually, but he said it's evolving. I don't know if you've got any more to add on your side from the Melbourne scene.
I think he's 100% correct. I think there's a number of quite established venture funds here, and there's some standouts in terms of the founders and the entrepreneurs side. Safety Culture, Canva, really big companies that have done really well. There's established funds, Blackbird, Airtree, Squarepeg, good funds. I think one of the challenges for the Australian ecosystem is accessibility and the openness of it. And there's a girl called Lauren Kaplan who is doing a phenomenal job. She's running StartMate, who is doing just this incredible job of making the ecosystem more accessible. Mm-hmm. One of the challenges I think you've got is people feel like they've got to come from a startup background, or they've got to, worked at a really successful startup, or gone to university with someone who's in the startup. It's a hard nut to crack. And I think what Lauren's doing, and I think this is going to pay off enormously well for the entire startup community here in Australia. She's making it feel like anyone can join. And that's one of the things that I think, broadly speaking, we try and do it at ACT. And I think that's one of the things of the startup community here is, and what Lauren's doing is going to pay off. So, the more people you get into the startup community from the widest number of backgrounds helps the startup community. You need designers. You don't need all computer science graduates. You need VCs that don't have investment banking backgrounds. You need VCs who aren't all, MBA graduates. You need different types of people. So when I say diversity, I think, all the various backgrounds of people is critically important. The background, whether it be race, gender, socioeconomic background, all of those sort of factors are really important. But you also need people from different careers, like someone who's been a graphic designer or just have a really unique insight into how to solve tech problems. So I think that's what Lauren's doing, and I think she's doing an amazing job. I think there's some really interesting things up in Queensland. They've got, some amazing government programs around R&D credits and tax credits for engineers to work up there. I think that's really, really good. It makes the cost of running a business in Australia where, wages are high. I think that makes that really interesting. And I think what's happening, and we're super fortunate, Olivia Humphreys that I mentioned earlier, we're starting to see entrepreneurs who have been successful overseas return to Australia. And with that comes this recycled intellectual capital. And that is far more valuable than this commodity of, financial capital that we give out as VCs.
Yeah.
I think when those sorts of people come back to Australia, whether they've, been successful in Europe, London, the US, Southeast Asia, when they come back to Australia and they invest their time, their energy, as well as, being supported by the financial capital to get behind that, I think that's really interesting. And I think Australia as a market is just starting to see that happen because, it obviously takes a while for these people to sort of have their own businesses mature externally. Get the services.
I think when people talk about, California and the US being a mature market for startups and VCs, like for me, that's one of, not just on the entrepreneur side, but also on the VC side, right, that know the full cycle and have done it many times. And then, using that knowledge to help other people up the ladder if you're an entrepreneur, or know which deals you already that are more likely to pay off than you would otherwise, not making the naive mistakes. So it's interesting to hear that, in Australia, you're just starting to see the green shoots of that maturity.
Yeah, and I think when I spent time in the Valley, it's that classic cluster effect. Success attracts other success, and then you get the
halo effect. Halo. Yeah.
You get the universities that are, that are really attractive, and then the curriculum that, the businesses that are succeeding informs the curriculum, and then the curriculum educates the next generation, and they then become the employees that the really successful companies want. And then the really successful companies grow, scale, create these exit events, and then you get this intellectual capital that is paired with the liquidation event of an IPO or an exit. Now these individuals have that angel money. So the angels then can reinvest their time as well as their capital to grow the next generation. And that classic sort of cluster effect, it just takes a while to mature in other markets.
I also think the media plays a part in terms of the mass media. I mean, it was quite interesting this week because there's a business called Laundry Heat, and I was just sort of munching away on my breakfast, and I nearly swallowed my spoon because all of a sudden Dayan was on Sky Breakfast News, and Dayan and I, we worked together and we've advised them, and they pitched at our events, and it was about their raise, which was a decent raise, but it was it was I think total 3.5 million, and it was just talking about obviously what they're doing, Laundry Heat through COVID, and it was like a mainstream breakfast news item, which I don't know if you're quite there in Oz yet, because I know there's a bit of mining and resource kind of chatter around. But that's really interesting. So I suppose talking about newsworthy as well, clearly we sort of there's a few things that are dominating the news at the moment. I'm especially in the UK, or in the tech community, especially in the UK. So the whole Reddit saga, and wondered what your views were there. SPACs are obviously kind of big as well. I don't know if you've got the whole SPAC debate going on in Oz, but it's certainly, happening in the UK. So I just wondered what thoughts on those two to start off with.
Let's start with the second one first, because this week, I think it was, there were all these kind of reports or headlines talking about how retail investors didn't care about SPACs, weren't getting into SPACs, felt very funny about SPACs, and SPACs are kind of falling on their face, which is kind of funny because it, for me at least, it's ironic because it then ties to the other point with Reddit and GameStop and how these retail investors are, the dumb money and are getting into things, but, arguably a lot of them have made out multimillionaires. So it's kind of a funny one.
You've got so many threads to unpack there. Like the SPAC part first, or, it's almost, every headline or a second headline, whether you're at the FT or whatever it is, Australia is not immune to it. We're a small market though. So the SPACs that I think are going to have impact are probably located in Southeast Asia, Singapore, Jakarta, Hong Kong, China. And we're going to sort of see that sort of permeate down, and we'll probably be a part of it. SPACs as a whole, there is so much money washing around. And the thing with a SPAC is it has a timeline. So as the time is running out on a SPAC, you're going to make shitty investments, which are ultimately going to end poorly, or there is no incentive for the fund or the fund manager who's raised the SPAC to give the money back. So I think it creates a terrible dynamic. So, and the history of SPACs is not a good one. Like, there'll be some winners, but
lots of losers.
It's going to be the power law of distribution, just like in
100%, 100%. So if your SPAC has most of them are 2-year lifespans, I think, from the time you close your SPAC. So if you're sitting at the 18-month mark and you're incentivized to deploy the capital and you haven't found a great deal in 18 months, that last period is a race to deploy the capital. So, I think I saw, was it Sport Radar recently was acquired through a SPAC. So their last valuation was about 2 billion. And the SPAC has valued them at 10. Now,
and what was the time difference between those two?
Only a couple of years. Now, don't we're recording here, but we need to do some background research on those numbers. So, they're in inverted commas and they need some background. But my thinking is how bullish do you have to be on the business and that macro trend around sports betting and sports data and sports media data to justify that? And then if you've taken, if your capital is deployed to achieve that $10 million valuation, how much work does Sport Radar have to do to not be a $10 billion company, to just start delivering that value that's beyond $10 billion? Where is their growth? So
yeah, it's quite interesting.
It's in a black box called a SPAC box.
One of the things that I thought would happen with SPACs is that once the hype phase kind of dies down, maybe the free market would start to normalize some of the performance of SPACs. I just didn't expect the hype phase to be so short, but it seems like it's already, people have already cottoned on to some of the points that you've made.
I think it's the power of brand. So, the power of the brand of the individual. So, you look in the US, an Alex Rodriguez raises a multiple $100 million, SPAC. What's his background as a fund manager? I don't know. Probably minimal. Now, that's not saying he couldn't make some good investments, because his brand power will sort of significantly over-index for his deal flow. So he could get lucky and make a phenomenal investment. But if you're actually applying some fundamentals around, funds and fund allocation, why would you give someone who was a phenomenal baseball player a couple of $100 million? That doesn't actually match up.
That is just peak of the business cycle.
Now, if you're looking at a guy like Chamath Palihapitiya, who was sort of pioneered the sort of first wave of the SPACs, he did it because he was trying to solve a problem of how to take good private companies public. So he had a real logic to the way that he was doing it. It was very formulaic, highly researched, highly data driven. So the SPACs for him were this vehicle to take private companies public, and it works quite well. And Chamath, he made a lot of money at Facebook, but his social capital has been a real kind of pushing the envelope, whether it be a VC or a fund manager. He has a track record as a fund manager. So you should give him some money. But all these other people that are popping up doing SPACs, I'm just like, come on.
Yeah, I suppose topping that off, the third trend, which I don't think they've created a Clubhouse SPAC yet, but I'm sure, there might be one on the way. But the I mean, I'd love your views on Clubhouse, because clearly I've been the last one was last night. I was watching Arsenal Olympiacos. Hey Chris, join our chat on some load of bollocks, and on it's live now, and we'd really love you to be there. I'm like, well, I'm having a beer watching the game. Bugger off, kind of imposing yourself. So I mean, are you into Clubhouse? Are you using it? You got the @Capital Clubhouse room set up?
That's not happening. So my view on Clubhouse, and my view on most of these sorts of platforms, is they're talent driven. So if I'm bad talent, it doesn't matter where you put me, it's going to be a bad experience. If I host Clubhouse and I'm shit at it, it's going to be a shit experience. That's life. Do you know what I mean?
That is so accurate.
I don't make YouTube videos because I'm not good at it. I have no interest in doing it. And the amount of times that I've gone into a Clubhouse because I think like directionally or the topic is interesting, I'm like, oh, cool, I'll listen to that. The person moderating or the person is terrible. And it's like, you go into the Clubhouse and they've got 3 people on the panel. It's meant to go for half an hour and they haven't even finished the interviews, and you're at the 40-minute mark. I'm like, I'm out. Like, so it's talent. Anything like that is talent driven. Yeah. I'm really interested to understand what Twitter is doing around sessions and their audio products, because I think that's super interesting, because that way you're giving these people on Twitter that have curated highly engaged audiences with massive reach, giving them these tools to start monetizing and creating an intimate moment with their fans. That I think is super interesting.
Do you think they brought the timeline for all those changes at Twitter up because of things like Clubhouse? Was this supposed to come out next year, and they're like, oh my God, quick?
Do you think that's because Twitter, of all the major platforms, has been the worst at product innovation? They sat on their hands for probably, 4 or 5 years and haven't...
Imagine people at Twitter, we just wanted to get it right, okay?
And all of a sudden, now we're going into trial phase. Like, I'd say that's a pretty healthy gap. I mean, one of the things I think you did before, Chris, on the email, which we're super, whether it's ACT or me prefacing and our interest, is NFTs. Because I know everyone's talking about this at the moment, but I think it's super interesting, because the way that we're looking at NFTs is this real sort of store of value and this understanding of this tradable commodity. And that is really, really interesting, because for me, there's the Bitcoin buzz, and whether it's a, token or whether it's a currency, whether it's a store of value, there is a whole Twitter thread that is going to have a whole, field day with that. But for me, the NFTs are interesting because the blockchain provides this real level of transparency. And you can start to authenticate the individual. And then if you can create the, simple economic principles of supply and demand around a single token, that's really interesting, because you've already seen it happening with sneakers. Sneakers are traded. A lot of people on StockX and platforms like that, they buy and trade sneakers, which they'll never touch. They'll never see. They stick them in a warehouse. They're stores of value predicated on their potential upside, whether it be in 12 months or 5 years.
Yeah.
And I think what's happening with NFTs now, I think that is something that for the next 20 years, we could see some really interesting things happen.
I think it's so interesting because, one of the things that I understood very early on with blockchain is that one of the main problems they were solving was the trust issue, right? Because it's an immutable ledger that's distributed, decentralized. Nobody can control it. If a wrong instance comes in, it doesn't wash with the rest of the ledgers. It removes the trust issue. And if you look at counterfeits and all this sort of thing, those are all trust issues. Is this thing real? Is it what it says it is? So NFTs, I mean, big win for any of that space. Digital, in person, you know, just got to make sure that it's actually, you know, connected to that NFT.
You've nailed it. I think you've nailed it, the trust part. And yes, there's a company called Minted. So what you can start to do then, and Chris, I think it was your father-in-law, if my memory is correct, was a sports journalist or a football journalist. Was that?
Brother-in-law.
Brother-in-law was a journalist. Yeah. If we look at sport now, and we go for something in the AFL, if we sort of take it a bit close to home. If we look at these amazing moments, Leo Barry's mark or Tony Lockett's goal for the Sydney Swans, if you can own that moment and then get it authenticated by the individual, so Tony Lockett authenticates that moment through platforms like Minted, you can create these economics where that original token might be worth $1,000. But me as the owner, I can create a model where I get a residual on every trade after that. It might be 5%, but I can create this model where every time that token is traded, and I believe it has the ability to have sort of velocity of trading, I get 5% of that. That for me is super, super interesting. Same. I think some sports leagues and media companies are going to absolutely make a mess of this by flooding the market with it and oversupplying it, doing all away with any sort of economics around supply and demand. But I think certain leagues like NBA with Top Shot are really nailing it.
I think you've got a new business there, the Sportpool token, Matt.
I'm not smart enough to create my own tokens. There's
You're a clever man. You're a clever man. And I suppose you've kind of given us a bit of a view into the future with tokenization. We like to ask, I guess, any sort of black swans lingering in your mind that could throw tech, the world in general, off track in the next 3, 5, 10 years?
Small question. Not loaded. I'm not smart enough to answer it, but I'm currently back studying. So I'm doing a global executive MBA, and one of the things we've learned is that these sorts of things, whether it be a global pandemic, the shift from globalization to nationalized, whether it's short-termism versus long-termism, all of this plays out in cycles. It's going to happen again. I don't know whether I think a global pandemic is a once in a lifetime or once in 100 years.
100 years, isn't it? Yeah.
I think there's going to have another pandemic because I think the way that we are moving globally, I think the way that we're sort of putting pressure on the earth and, whether that be supply chains of food and sort of the, enormous population growth. I think we're putting unforeseen pressure on the world. I think that then has a sort of cause and effect, whether it be a pandemic, whether it be a change in weather patterns, climate change, all of those sorts of things. I think we're going to see a higher velocity of unforeseen events happening.
Yeah.
I think one of the beautiful things about the technology, and I'm really
saying in the next 10 years, you think?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think the next startup of $1 trillion is a climate change startup.
Right.
Yeah, and
biggest problem needs solving globally, so it makes sense.
Yeah, and I think there's probably. I also think you look at sort of historical markers of great change, and you look at sort of end of the Second World War and the changes around sort of health and population habits and movement. I think healthcare as a vertical. I think the next 10 years is probably the period of healthcare around. The shift from patient care through physician to, individualized patients. So us understanding our own biodynamics, our own blood pressure, our cholesterol, our glucose levels. I think that's really interesting. And these are the areas that I look at and think about outside of media where we spend all of our time. I just think it's going to happen again. I think, did I think 18 months ago that I'd have a curfew? No, I thought that was for movies. I just didn't think that happened. But you know what? We dealt with it. It was shit. Hard work.
Lockdown 3 is like just when's lockdown for? It's kind of used to be a movie.
If you listen to Chris Whitty, it's coming apparently sometime soon.
Yeah, he's on the show next week.
I believe the word he said was inevitable.
Well, I agree. The things that I worry about is my kids are really fortunate. We've got a roof over their heads and they've got Wi-Fi and they can get their education. What I worry about is the kids that have to run out to Taco Bell or a McDonald's or sit outside a library and try and get their Wi-Fi so they can do their school homework and things like that. That's the stuff that worries me.
Yeah,
that's the stuff that I really worry about, because we've already got this huge sort of disparity between the world, the haves and the have-nots. And I think the things like the pandemic bring that to everyone's attention. And they're the things that worry me.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really poignant message there, Matt. I suppose we're coming towards the end of our chat. It's been a joy. It's whizzed by. I really love catching up. Just a couple of things. You mentioned the kids, the studies. Do you have any time for anything else? And with that, Anthony and I always like to nose about what you're watching on streaming, the telly, anything in Oz. I mean, I quipped, I think I always have a quip about Neighbours and Home and Away, but I don't
have any time. And do you know what's really bad? But because I spent so long being a sports agent, I watch sport without seeing it through a certain lens. I've just started watching rugby again after a long time not being able to watch it. So I tune into it. My mum came.
League or union?
It's rugby union, the ones that can string sentences together. So my mum and I had sat in the lounge and watched a game, and I enjoyed it. I didn't know any of the players, and I watched it for a game of rugby, and I enjoyed it. Between study, I've got a 6-year-old girl and a 3-year-old boy. Study, work, trying to make sure that I don't give all the heavy lifting to my wife. That's enough.
Yeah, that's a decent answer. And then last one from me. Are Australia going to win the next World Cup?
Not a problem.
You heard it here, folks.
There you go. When is the next World Cup? They keep getting postponed, don't they?
They do. But before we finish, I do want to say, and whoever's listening to this, my first investor for Sportpool came through Chris. So I don't know if you know the history of that, but you introduced me to a lady by the name of Gillian Manus, who I kept in contact with, who then introduced me to Unshackled. So my investment for Sportpool came out of your events.
Thanks. Yeah, Gillian's a great lady. Structure BC. Yeah, she's great.
So that all happened on the back of us pitching at your event.
There you go. Connected world. What a way to end. Thank you, my friend. Been a pleasure. See you soon. Keep in touch. And hopefully see you over here one day again.
Perfect. See you soon. Bye.
Take care.